Welcome to the On List. Today we're talking about oud. So I said a while back when someone asked me about doing an episode on oud that I would do one once I felt confident enough in my knowledge and my experience with oud perfumes to actually do the subject justice. Oud is one of those things, like sandalwood, okay, like oak moss, where you have these massive tribal cult-like followings around this material. And if you don't cross your T's and dot your I's with exacting precision, they will come and they will cut you down, all right? They will thrash you within an inch of your life because they are just that obsessed and they are that determined to, again, uphold the honor of an inanimate object, right? Although with oud, I can understand a bit more than I can with something like oak moss because oud does have religious and cultural significance. So I give a bit of a pass to people who are really into oud because maybe for them, a part of their very real cultural identity is wrapped up in their knowledge and their use of oud in rituals, religious rituals, spiritual cleansings, whether it's a scent that they find in their temples, in their homes. Okay, it has real importance to their lives. So in the case of oud, it's a little more serious than it is people just flipping out about how much oak moss is in a perfume or flipping out about whatever, okay? There's a little more gravitas to oud for that reason. Sandalwood as well, okay? Sandalwood also has religious uses, medicinal uses, things of that nature. So armed with what I know now, I can actually do a quick breezer on the subject of oud, at least as it pertains to perfumery, more specifically Western perfumery. Right, so let's get started. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the history of oud because you can go on Wikipedia and learn everything you need to know about oud, and you can learn it better and in more detail than I could ever tell you in a YouTube video. So the Cliff Notes version of that is oud has been around for centuries. You could even say millennia, actually. It's been around for millennia, going back as far as I think 1400 BC. Which would be somewhere around 3,500 years ago. And oud has been used by cultures in the cradle of civilization, which is the Middle East, all the way through to parts of Asia, Southeast, and mainland continental Asia since that time. It is typically cultivated in and around the Middle East, but it can also be cultivated in Asia. You find oud coming from places like Cambodia, from Thailand, from China, from various parts of India as well, okay? Aquilara trees are the source of oud, and aquilara trees come in several different species, but all of them are equally endangered now. The same way that sandalwood is endangered and frankincense is endangered. The trees that produce dragon's blood, same thing, all endangered. Any kind of natural resource that produces a material which is then used for medicinal or perfumery purposes, whether to make incense or oils. Almost all of those materials now are endangered because we human beings have just overpopulated the planet, and our consumption for these things has not slowed down one bit. As there's more and more of us, and we all want to smell like sandalwood, right? We all want to smell like oud. Well, these trees, these poor trees, can't reproduce themselves quick enough before we chop them down. And in the case of oud, there is an extra requirement involved. You just can't chop down aquilara wood, which is known as eagle wood in some cultures as well, aloes wood in other cultures. You just can't go chopping it down and expecting it smells like oud as you know it, because it doesn't. And that's because in order to get an aquilara tree to produce actual agar wood, as it's known, it has to secrete a certain resin. And this resin is used to fight a fungal infection that apparently all these trees are somehow susceptible to. It's weird. All these trees are susceptible to this certain fungal parasite. Equally, all of them are. And all of them, once infected, produce this resin. So I don't know if it's some kind of symbiotic relationship here, that it's just meant to be this way. I don't know. but it gets infected. It produces this resin to stave off the infection, and then the resin makes the heartwood of the tree get really dark. And as it gets darker and darker, and the resin seeps into the wood further and further, it begins to create that characteristic oud smell that we all know, if you know what the smell of oud is. If you don't, you're about to in a second, so put a pin in that, all right? Stay in your seat. The next stage is finding the trees that have been infected well enough with this fungus that they produce this resin that saturates the wood and makes it dark, and then chipping out those parts. Obviously, if you're chipping the heartwood of a tree away, which is in the middle of the tree, right? If you're chipping the heartwood away, you're killing the tree altogether. So it pays the price for fighting off this infection with this fragrant resin by being chopped down and harvested up into agarwood chips. So that's it. You know, like harvesting musk pods from Siberian musk deer, okay? It's a one-way ticket, man. It's a one-way ticket. They go in the forever box. That's it. It's over. They get unalived for smelling good. Yeah, that's it. That's how it goes. So these poor trees get chopped down. The chips get processed. And then from there, it comes down to what do you want to do with your agarwood once you have it? Do you want to grind it up and coat incense sticks with it? Do you want to make incense cones out of it? Do you want to just burn the chips? Some cultures, they just burn the chips as they are, right, and produce the smell. You can also go that extra mile and you can begin creating oils. And you know, you take the oil and you have to effectively distill the oil from the wood. And there are many different processes with which you can do that. And I'm not going to get into those because that's too detailed. That's DIY perfumery at this point. If you're going to distill your own oud wood, you can ask Russian Adam about it. I'm sure he'll tell you all about how he does it. People who really do this, Ensar Oud's another one. I'm sure they have videos or they have content related to the in-depth process of distilling the oud wood. I am not going there, but that's one way you can do it. And then, of course, there are also adulterations where you take the oud oil and you cut it. Some of the more popular things to cut the oil with once you get it is you can cut it with civet, you can cut it with Tonkin musk, which those are both rare materials themselves, right? You can also cut it with amber because oud and amber go really well together. You can cut it with saffron, you can cut it with patchouli. So one of the reasons why a lot of oud perfumes, if you will, smell like combinations of saffron and patchouli and oud, or they smell like combinations of rose and patchouli and oud, or they smell like combinations of oud and amber and some musk. That's because those combinations harken back to traditional methods of adulterating the precious oil so that people can get more of it from less. Since not everyone's rich, okay? Not everyone in the Middle East was rich, but everyone loves oud. So they just learned to stretch the oud. And they stretch the oud by adulterating it with complementary materials. Now, this isn't really them trying to rip somebody off or them trying to get a fast one over. It's just them taking a precious resource and making it go further. And let's be honest, the materials they adulterate the oud with make it smell really good too. I mean, oud and amber smells amazing, doesn't it? Oud, rose oil, and patchouli also smell amazing. Oud and musk can be a good combination. So it's not like these adulterations are necessarily making inferior product here. You get good results, but they are, at their core, they are adulterations because they are taking and adding other materials, adjunct materials, be it as it may, but they are adding other materials to stretch the actual oud oil further. Now, us people here in the West, okay, we didn't really seem to get on board with oud. You might be wondering, as I often was, how come when French perfumers discovered fragrances from the Orient back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, into the turn of the 21st century and the 1920s, you know, when they were discovering amber, and they were discovering sandalwood, and they were discovering things like orris butter and Turkish rose, why didn't they also discover oud? Why did they literally discover just about everything but, right? Why didn't Shalimar have oud in it in 1925, right? Why didn't Dana Taboo have an oud note in it, since oud and amber are commonly found together? Well, I have researched and researched and researched and done everything I can to try and give you that answer. Sadly, I could not find anything concrete. So here we are, about 10 minutes and 30 seconds in. I can only give you conjecture on as to why I think maybe French perfumers, English perfumers, Spanish perfumers, general Occidental, Western perfumers, why they skipped over oud and went with civet and tonkin and sandalwood, all these materials that, like I said, are very typical of Middle Eastern fare, of Oriental fare, if you want to call it that. Why do they skip over oud and just go with literally everything but, right? Everything but. Why? I don't know. I mean, I think because it wasn't palatable, honestly, you know? I know you might be thinking that doesn't make sense since, you know, we like to use civet and castoreum, and those are all really musky animalic notes, right? Castoreum is very fleshy, and civet is, some people call that Uranus or poo-poo, right? Hyraceum is another material that actually did not really get much use in Western perfumery either. So you can lump in hyraceum with oud. But the general opinion I have is it wasn't about rarity or scarcity, since sandalwood was plenty rare, you know, but I just feel like it wasn't palatable. I feel like when you had perfumers sort of like Jacques Guerlain and Ernest Beau and Francois Coty and these other ones, Paul Parquet, and these other early 20th century, Henry Robert, right? Vincent Roubert, Germaine Cellier, Paul Vacher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like these perfumers probably smelled oud. I'm sure they got their nose on it, but then they were like, no, there's nothing we can, there's no way we can incorporate that into our fragrances. We can do civet, we can do castoreum, we can do tonkin musk. We're familiar with how all those work. We can do frankincense, we can do myrrh, we can get sandalwood to play nicely with materials that we have in the West, like lavender and various floral materials and citruses and what have you not. But that oud is just on a different level. We don't have a way of taming that. We can't really tame that note. That note's too out there. Very phenolic, okay, very hair of the dog that bit you, as I like to say, okay, very horse's ass. So here's the thing. If you've never smelled actual oud oil in the raw, like I'm not talking about oud perfumes you buy from Frederick Malle that cost as much as a month's rent. I'm talking about actual oud oil. You've smelled it. It comes in a wide variety of flavors, but they all smell relatively the same. They all have a profile that you will go, yes, that's oud. And typically that is a phenolic profile. So it's going to have a bit of a dirty bird note to it, but the way that phenolic dirty bird note manifests really depends on how it's distilled. So if you're getting oud that comes from places like India, okay, Hindi oud in particular is very, very nasty. It is very stinky butt. It is very barnyard, very circus, straw matting for animals to lay on, all that stuff. Other cultures tend to distill it and refine it more and more over sometimes multiple times again, and they can remove a lot of that sulfuric element out. They can remove that phenolic element out down to a point, not completely, but down to a point. And then those ouds will smell more chocolatey. They will smell more rubbery. Some will say medicinal. You hear the word medicinal used, but medicinal, rubbery, chocolatey, okay. It still has that phenolic element there, but it's not as intense as a straight up Hindi oud or something like that. Typically, the Cambodian ouds are more tempered. The Thai ouds are more tempered. Chinese oud is also more tempered. These ouds from these regions tend to be a little more tempered, but the ouds that come from the Indian subcontinent in particular, Those are really, really, if you want musky, okay, if you want the most dirty bird blast, bed sheets, wild night leathers and chains and riding crops and all that stuff, that's what you want, then you want the ouds from India, really. You want those Hindi ouds. Those are going to be the nastiest ones. And I say nasty in a good way because some of you like that sort of thing. I do to a degree, of course. I've got limits, but I do too. Now, we've got that out of the way. Oud did eventually surface in the West, but it would take, well, about 80 years. Once the whole Oriental phenomenon kicked off in the 1910s, 1920s, it would take another 80, 90 years for oud to play catch up with everything else. Sandalwood, again, saffron, various resins, tolu balsam, stuff like that, okay, frankincense, yada, yada, yada. Oud would eventually get invited to the party, way late, but it would. And I think what changed wasn't necessarily the smell. Obviously, oud is oud is oud is oud. They've been using it as a part of daily life in the Middle East, in Asia, like I said, for millennia. So the scent hasn't changed. But what changed is people's appetite for the exotic, people's appetite for something that goes against the grain. And that started to really increase into the 2000s. And just like how the pendulum swings back and forth between loud and quiet, clean and dirty, 70s was very raunchy into the 80s, 90s was very clean, early 2000s was very clean. So right around the mid 2000s, the pendulum began to swing and people wanted louder and heavier, maybe not necessarily dirtier, okay, not dirtier, but they wanted louder, heavier, bolder perfumes. They were tired of the aquatics. They were tired of the fresh fougères. They were tired of the ozonic stuff. They were tired of all the blase blah. They want something that was more punch to the face. And oud was perfect for that because it was an unexplored area and technology, primarily chemistry, had caught up to a point where Western perfume oil houses like Varanis, like Givaudan, like IFF could produce reasonable facsimiles of oud with very little to no actual oud and make it smell convincing enough that even people from the Middle East, from Asia, who would know the smell of oud, of course they would, right? They've had it forever. Even they would go, okay, this is acceptable. So if you can get them to bite, if you're able to get them to bite, then you've done a good job. Your synthetic oud is a thumbs up if you're able to get people from that part of the world where it's common to actually go, yes, this smells good. This smells like oud. I like this. So keep that in mind. A lot of people like to attribute Tom Ford as the first real oud perfume in the West, but I argue against that. And I think Balenciaga got the jump, but not intentionally. Not intentionally. I think it just happened to be that when Balenciaga was still owned by the Bogart Group, and Bogart is known for loud perfumes, right? Somebody who was working on the brief for Balenciaga Pour Homme got their hands on some oud somewhere. Maybe it was a little tiny supply of it or whatever. However they got their hands on it, they worked a little bit of it into the Amber Accord. So they had a very oudy Amber Accord. But no one knew what that was in 1990, right? So they never listed oud in the official note breakdown of Balenciaga Pour Homme. It's not in there. It doesn't say oud, it just says amber. But anyone who knows what oud smells like knows that fragrance has oud in it. It definitely has oud in it. So that fragrance also was limited production. It was only sold for a couple of years, and it got discontinued. So they never had to worry about trying to replace that oud material because they weren't making more than one batch of that. It was one and done. It was gone. So whatever was in the world was in the world, and that stuff sat unloved. And those of you vintage guys out there, you know, because you own bottles of this stuff, you know it sat unloved for like 30 years. You could buy it all day long, anywhere you wanted for like $10, $15, Ross, TJ Maxx, wherever. Nobody wanted it. It wasn't until recent years that it started to go and become a sacred, worshipful, kind of thing. But for the longest time, it was not like that. Now, fast forward to 2002, and yes, now I can say, yes, Tom Ford helped introduce oud with the M7 fragrance in 2002, and that was a YSL product. But that really wasn't an oud smell like we think of it. It was a woody amber smell, a woody amber smell that really went more in the medicinal side of the oud spectrum, but purely synthetic, obviously. Then he would continue along with oud wood under his own line. He would release in 2007, I believe. And that pushed the same woody amber profile further. And we would see it again with Gucci Pour Homme 2003. And then Tom Ford has just been banging out one oud after another. They're all just the same woody amber molecule, right? Then the rest of the industry got in on it, because really good synthetic proxies, as I said earlier, really good synthetic proxies began to hit the market. So we would see a lot of things. We would see various niche brands like Le Labo and by Kilian, and even Dior, Privé would have some ouds, the higher end designers. It became a little bit of a big bang, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. It exploded. Suddenly, everyone and their mother was making an oud fragrance, and the vast majority of them don't have any oud in them, or have so little oud as to make it inconsequential, whether it's there or not, right? Like having your 0.0001% oak moss in your fragrance doesn't really make a lick of shit, does it? No. So it's the same sort of deal. And then you have entire brands like Fragrance Du Bois that are focused on oud fragrances, and I won't get into that because I don't want to get sent a cease and desist letter by them, since they're very sue happy, but they base their whole brand around oud. I'll just leave these here for you to decipher as you see fit, but oud, okay? So now we summarize the end of the video with the fact that there are some really good takes on oud, whether they contain oud or not. One such bottle I will show you right now before I cap this off is this one by a little known, unknown brand. They have a long history. They were around since like 1902, perhaps earlier than that, but they're not popular. They're one of those brands that if you live in France, you know who they are, but outside of France, people don't really know. And it's Berdoux's, and Berdoux's has released a oud line, and this one called Oud Wa Misk is just one of them. And Oud Wa Misk is basically oud and musk. So it's going to have a bit of that Tonkin musk, that furry animal kind of musk vibe, with a little bit of rose, a little bit of patchouli, a little bit of your typical oud structure, but it smells really well done. It smells very like authentic to the Middle East. It's the kind of fragrance that you would expect a Middle Eastern brand to put out, even though it's a French brand. So these guys did their homework, okay? They know what they're doing. They do honor to the cultural heritage. Sadly, most of these fragrances do not. A lot of your big niche ouds, like your Juliet Has a Gun ouds, and your Parfum de Marly ouds, and your Initio ouds, and all those, they don't resemble anything that a person from the Middle East would want to wear at all. They're very candy-coated with the rose. The patchouli is very heavy-handed. The saffron is very heavy-handed. The oud is barely there, if there at all. So a lot of those are just very liberal interpretations of the accord. In the same way that a lot of sandalwood fragrances now don't smell like sandalwood. They smell like something else. So it can be a bit of a minefield. And I will probably do a video later on where I talk about my favorite oud fragrances and give you a bit more of a breakdown on different textures, like the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? This is just describing oud itself and the phenomenon that resulted from it. So I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope you learned something. And I will catch you next time.